At a special China-Africa summit on COVID-19, President Xi Jinping said China will work with global partners, including the UN and the WHO, to assist Africa's response to the pandemic. He says China will write off interest-free loans to African countries due for repayment by the end of this year. China further pledged to build hospitals and send more medical staff. What do China's promises mean to African nations? And after the complaints of racial discrimination against Africans in Guangzhou and the killing of 3 Chinese citizens in Zambia, where are Sino-African relations today and how are they likely to change in the future? I'm joined in Beijing by Han Hua, research fellow at Chongyang Institute of Renmin University, and by Skype from Kuala Lumpur by Hannah Ryder, CEO of Development Reimagined. Han Hua, can I go to you first? President Xi pledged a number of things to African nations to help them fight, prevent, and control COVID-19. How do you look at China's role in Africa's fight against this pandemic?
Well, China and Africa's mutual role and responsibilities in helping and supporting each other actually dated back several decades ago and even longer. So it is no stranger for this time for China's response to support Africa nations, countries to fight against COVID-19 in a very, very special period of time. And the roles and responsibilities have ever been strengthened since the COVID-19 outbreak worldwide. And it's the natural outcome for this special summit between Chinese leader and the African countries' leaders. And China's pledge and commitment to continue supporting African countries in fighting against COVID-19, not only towards the healthcare part, but also towards the economic recovery, as well as the long-term cooperation between China and the African countries, has ever been strengthened and will be setting a new model for the cooperation between regions and between China and African countries.
Well, Hua, we know that China is potentially facing a second wave. President Xi Jinping himself admitted that. There was a small outbreak in the vegetable market in western Beijing a week ago. Do you think that will perhaps compromise China's capability to help Africa and other countries at this point?
No, I don't think so. I'm in Beijing, you're in Beijing, so we have all been experiencing in the past week of this roller coasting situation of Beijing or China experiencing this second wave of pandemic. But we are feeling very safe. I hope you have the same feeling because of the testing ability and the lessons learned or the experiences learned from our past months in dealing with this pandemic has been stronger. So we are having more testing capabilities. So everybody in China is feeling safer compared to several months ago when the outbreak first happened in Wuhan and break out nationwide. So I don't think this will compromise China's support in helping other countries, especially for African countries, because I think the Chinese government, together with the financial institutions, getting involved in African response in coping with the pandemic is more experienced. And we are eyeing the long-term cooperation with African countries. As I said, not in the short-term healthcare response towards the African countries, but also the economic recovery, how to engage African countries in this economic recovery and build up a long-term, for example, the debt relief effort, as well as other efforts, for example, the the CDC center restructuring. So these efforts will not be compromised at this moment.
Yeah, everyone's praying that there will be no such thing as a second wave in Beijing and China. Hannah, let me turn to you in Kuala Lumpur. According to Africa's CDC, as of Wednesday, there have been more than 270,000 confirmed cases of COVID-19, over 7,000 deaths, and this figure is really staggering. Infections have more than doubled in the past 3 weeks. What stage do you think is Africa at right now? Was it more like China in February and Italy in March?
This is a good question. Well, I think when you look at the overall cases, of course, it looks very, very worrying, and there's good reason to be worried, especially in countries such as South Africa, Nigeria, Algeria as well. A real good number of countries, 25 countries, have over 500 active cases that they are dealing with, and countries such as South Africa, as I mentioned, have many, many more. On the other hand, what we also have to remember is Africa is not one country, and it's 55 countries altogether, and 14 of those have under 100 cases that they're dealing with at the moment. So you can't say that there's one single story across Africa, but what is very clear beyond the health impact is that the economic impact for the African continent is very strong and is going to be very challenging to recover from. And this is where the impact of the kind of summit that was held yesterday could be of real support, and is definitely a great first step in trying to support African countries. We definitely need to do more, and I think we can discuss what sorts of things, but this is a very good step, a step in the right direction to support a continent of 1.3 billion people.
Right. Hannah, how is the pandemic compounding other public health challenges many African countries face, from HIV/AIDS, malaria, to simply malnutrition?
Well, so the World Bank has come out with recent estimates about the impact on poverty, for instance. Of course, with restrictions on movement, curfews and so on, of course, people are finding it hard to get access to the kinds of medicines they need. They find it hard to get to make economic activity. But even more broader than that, even more broader than the health impact, we have to remember that what's happening right now is a global shutdown, and that global shutdown is affecting African countries. For example, issues such as tourism. Kenya, where I'm from, is suffering hugely from that drop in tourism. Countries such as Rwanda are trying to open up this month to international tourists, but of course it's going to be a very long journey ahead, and effectively it's all sectors of the economy that are being affected. So there's a lot of work to be done.
A lot of work to be done indeed. One specific pledge Beijing said it will do is that it will write off interest-free loans extended to African nations. Han Hua in Beijing, how significant do you think that gesture is to Africa?
Well, Wang Guan, speaking of the volume, it is already a very huge volume in terms of the write-off support of towards African countries. And even though it accounts for a less percentage in terms of the total debt African countries are facing, it is still a very symbolic as well as significant gesture towards the other creditors, not only China. China is one of the largest creditors of African countries, but African countries are certainly expecting, especially during this suffering of pandemic, they're expecting the creditors worldwide, including international financial institutions, other countries like US or European countries, and the private sectors to come up with more creative or innovative ideas towards giving them a debt relief. So China is moving forward, or is even leading these efforts in giving this debt relief to African countries to take off the burden when they face the post-COVID-19 period of time, to seek new ways, new innovative ways of economic recovery, to be more involved into this world economic recovery process.
Right, we know that China is not the only country Africa or many African nations are indebted to. Many African nations are also indebted to multinational organizations and private sector donors. Hannah in Kuala Lumpur, what does China's willingness to write off the loans mean to these other players? I mean, will China's gesture change the debt dynamic on the continent?
Well, I think we are moving in the right direction, but let me give you some figures just to get this in perspective. So my firm has calculated that the total amount of budget that African governments have set aside so far for COVID-19 is around $53 billion US. At the same time, in 2018, African countries together were expected to be paying $76 billion in debt repayments. That's to China, that's to the private sector, that's to the multinational institutions, and so on. So what we have is of course, any contribution is, of course, welcome to try to bring that sum down, and whether it's cancellation of the interest-free loans or the initiative from the G20 to suspend debt repayments. But take the G20 initiative. The G20 initiative helps 40 African countries, not all 55. And it also applies to it could, at its maximum, will be $20 billion equivalent just for 2020. But there's not yet any certainty, and I know China has said that it will try to encourage this and push it. There's not any certainty as to whether those repayments will also be suspended for 2021 or 2022, and that's what African leaders are asking for. So there's a very clear ask from the African side, but there's a lot more work with China, with the institutions, with the private sector to find the right solution.
Right, that China-Africa relations are certainly multifaceted. Han Hua in Beijing, I want to ask you this question. You know, more and more frequently we hear about reports and cases of racism against Africans in China, in Guangzhou and other cities. Do you think China has done enough to address the issue of racial discrimination against Africans or people of African descent in China?
I certainly see with the closer and closer cooperation between China and Africa countries, there are great potential, improving potential in terms of having closer relationship between two peoples. So I did see some reports from Guangzhou or some other areas where there are African people coming to China, doing business in China, studying in China, or having other professions in China, and they suffered some so-called discriminations in China. There are reports on that. So from the positive perspective, I do see a lot of potential to be increased, to see whether we can come up with more tailor-made regulations or government policies towards dealing with these individual cases to help them live in China more happily, and to get them some tailor-made policies and regulations to help with them.
Right, we do hope that will be the case. You know, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo recently said that no country will rival what the U.S. is doing in terms of supporting the fight against COVID-19 in Africa. You know, China has also claimed that, well, actually, indeed, it has done a lot to help African nations. How do you think the continent of Africa feel about perhaps being caught in the middle between the great powers?
I don't know where the confidence comes from the Secretary Pompeo by saying that, because China has never been Americans' shoes in cooperating with African countries, and China's policies and China's approaches towards cooperating with African countries are totally different from what the Americans or the Western countries people do in African countries. The approaches are totally different because the mindset are different, and in their approaches they really value the return on investment in terms of the investment terminology. But China on the other side, they value the infrastructure building and they value the platform establishment, so that the two peoples and the two parts can work together in unity and solidarity and to achieve longer-term profit for both sides. So these are totally different approaches, and with different approaches, I definitely see different results, and we can see the immediate response from the African countries in terms of the fighting against COVID-19. When China is providing a lot of PPEs, and in addition to the debt relief, and also China is providing the longer-term solutions or roadmap together with African countries, while American is kind of retreating from their the countries and also hold down the American first policy.
Right, I think action speaks loud. Many thanks to you, Han Ha. Take care, be safe. Also, my thanks to Hannah Ryder in Kuala Lumpur.